Pete Palestina. Pete?
Morning. Considering the fact that many of our members are attending the Agents Association meeting in Hershey, we're very pleased with the turnout we had today. We usually average 50 to 60. We had 74 sign up, or some have not arrived, and I hope they're okay. I would think that we could have had at least 40 more today because of the Hershey. And since we had over 100 last month, from now on, all our breakfast meetings will be held in the Constitution Room, which is on the 3rd floor. That will hold about 130. For those new designees, we hope you will attend future meetings on a regular basis. We usually meet once a month and then break for the summer. We'll skip November because of I-Day, which this year will be held at the Bellevue on November 18th, and we should be receiving flyers in the mail shortly on that one. Our December breakfast meeting will be on December 18th, right here in the Constitution Room, here at the hotel, but in the Constitution Room. The speaker will be David Schrempf, who is a Executive Vice President of INA, and he directs the Agency and Insurance Services Division of the Property and Casualty Group. This should be a great meeting, and since Mr. Schrempf deals with the agency force, but from the company side of the fence, I'm sure his comments will be of interest to all of us. The reservation and announcement flyers will probably be mailed in mid-November for that meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's speaker. He is a member of the United States Congress representing the 8th Congressional District, which comprises Bucks County and part of Montgomery County. He is a graduate of Harvard Business School with a master's in business administration and has lectured at the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School from 1974 to 1978. He became president of the Coyne+Chemical Corporation in 1971, and in 1976 founded and became president of Rechem Company, which was one of the nation's first firms dedicated to promoting renewable resource technology in the energy marketplace. He founded and became chairman of Energy Management Services, which is a conservation firm. He has acted as a consultant to various United States and independent corporations, including Philadelphia Blue Cross and Blue Shield. His first committee assignment in Congress was banking and House administration. He's here to bring us up to date on the first session of the 97th Congress and anything else he'd like to tell us about. Would you please welcome the Honorable James K. Coyne.
Thank you very much. This is a real thrill for me to stand up before a group of risk managers, or at least people who are experienced in dealing with risk management. Believe me, there's nothing with greater risk than running for political office, and if anybody has a policy that you'd like to sell me to protect against the next year's campaign risk, please let me know. I'm a newcomer in politics. I haven't been involved in it too long. As some of you know, I see fellows like John Moten. In fact, my brother-in-law is here, which is a great thrill for me. To see people who I know, and most of you know that I've been in business most of my life. And I haven't really had an opportunity to, before coming to Washington, to get trained in politics. A lot of people used to ask me, where did you learn what you know about politics? Where did you get the experience to run for Congress? And I said, well, frankly, for about 3 months when I was 1971, I worked for an insurance company. And working for an insurance company is the best training possible to learn politics. In fact, I worked for INA here in Philadelphia. I was a vice president for a very short period of time. And I honestly think that INA is the best training ground for politics anywhere in the country. I won't go into really explain that comment in greater depth until we get away from the public forum. But this year in Washington has been one of the most historic, dramatic, revolutionary moments, or moments of history in my lifetime. I'm an Irishman, so I guess that's explains that I'm just lucky enough to pick the right year to move to Congress. I hope all of you have watched the revolutionary change that has taken place since last November and have felt that a lot of it is in the right direction, at least. Certainly, I don't think any president or Congress is going to make everybody happy all of the time. I think many of the things that you've seen taking place have been a step in the right direction. Of course, most people look back on last November's election and say that it was probably the most historic election since 1932. Most people say that the reason for that great history-changing event was the election of Ronald Reagan as president. And frankly, having met him now about 6 or 7 times, I can't tell you how refreshing it is to have a president who does the very simple thing of doing what he said he was going to do. It's been a long time since we've had that kind of straightforward leadership at the White House. And regardless of whether you think everything he's done is right or not, you do have to admire the man for doing what he believes in and standing up for what he considers important. A lot of other people say that the really significant part of the election last November was, of course, the victory in the Senate, where the Republican Party took control of the U.S. Senate for the first time since 1954. And frankly, President Reagan wouldn't have been able to achieve any of the changes that he's undertaken in the last 10 months had he not had that majority of his party in the Senate. You can see the dramatic effect of that just in the individual committees in the Senate, where, as you know, the majority party controls every single committee in either house of Congress. So every single committee chairman and subcommittee chairman in the Senate up until last November was, of course, a Democrat. Now they're all Republicans, and that is a very, very significant change in terms of initiating the legislative changes that are required. But I think it wasn't really the election of Ronald Reagan or the victory in the Senate that was the historic part of last November's election. I think, frankly, it was the simple fact that in the House of Representatives we defeated 29 lawyers. And we got a few more to get rid of yet. I'm sure we have a few lawyers in the audience, and of course I'm not being critical of your profession, but I do think that the House of Representatives is really the stumbling block for a lot of the effective changes that we need to undertake in Congress or in the government right now. And I'm pleased to have had the opportunity, my wife and I, to go to Washington and represent the 8th Congressional District, which, as you may know, is all of Bucks County and the eastern portion of Montgomery County. This has been an exciting year. For me, the first week or so, we went down to a course for new congressmen. I was really surprised. It wasn't chartered, unfortunately, but it was nevertheless a good course where we were locked in a hotel room, quite literally, for a week out of the Dulles Airport, all the new Republican candidate members of Congress, the 52 of us. And they just, course after course, the first courses were the most interesting one. The first 2 days were devoted entirely to teaching us the difference between an FBI agent and an Arab. I apparently mastered the subject better than most, because in April, when Ray Lederer was expelled, I got his old office. But seriously, we've had a lot to learn. Congress is I think each of you would love it. It's very similar to what you do in many cases. You're sort of the man in the middle, just like you were in more cases than not between the customer and the insurance company. And of course the customer is saying all the things he wants, and the insurance supplier or company is telling you all the things they can or cannot do. Being in the Congress is the same thing. You're in the middle, but unfortunately you've got 552,000 customers, and you've got the world's worst supplier. The federal government, the Social Security Administration, the Veterans Administration, what have you. Of course, the good thing about it is that your customers all place their order on the same day. And so you don't have to worry about repeat sales, at least not for 2 years. But we've had an interesting time this year, of course. The most important change, I think, has been in dealing with the economic recovery program that the President introduced in February, last February 18th. I hope that many of you saw that on television when he announced his four-part program to turn the country around. As I said many times last year during the campaign, the three major problems in the country are inflation, inflation, and inflation. And he presented a program that covered the gamut, from reduced government spending, lower taxes, reduced federal regulatory burden, and of course monetary policy reform. But the principal part, or the most challenging part of his proposal, was to reduce the government's budget, to stop the continued growth of the federal government at a compound rate of more than 15% per year. And on February 18th, he proposed that the federal budget be reduced by 10%. Well, you might be interested to know that the next day, I was sitting in my House Administration Committee, which is the committee where Congress decides how much money it spends on itself, how much our own budgets are. And the next day, Tip O'Neill came into our committee and submitted the budget proposals for Congress. The President the night before had asked for a 10% cut. The next day, Tip O'Neill asked for a 30% increase in the budget of Congress. So I was brand new. I've been in the job for 6 weeks. I raised my hand and I said, Mr. Speaker, I really think we have an excellent opportunity here to show the American people that we're interested in setting an example. And we too can tighten our belt and lead by demonstrating that we can achieve more with less money. And so I made a motion in committee to cut the budget of Congress by 10%, the same as the President did ask for. It seemed to be very common sense to me. Well, the vote, I'm happy to say, I got 9 votes. I got all the Republicans on the committee to vote for me, and all the Democrats voted against me, so it was 12 to 9. Well, then I got out my little book on how Congress rules or operates that they'd given me at the course, and it said that if you lose a vote in committee, you can still take it to the House floor. So I went to the House floor the next day, all prepared to introduce my amendment on how we should reduce the budget of Congress by 10%, and I got what is known as catch-22. The Speaker had gone to the Rules Committee the previous evening and had presented a rule, which was for that next day's debate on this bill, saying that there could be no debate, nor no amendments, or any amendments. So here we were faced with a proposal for 30%. This is how the place operates. So then I got my little book out again, and I say, what do I do? And there was a little fine rule in there that's called the 1-minute rule that says that any member of Congress can stand up only at the beginning of the day's session and speak for 60 seconds on any subject that he wants. And this is they can't overrule you on this. This is a permanent rule. So I got all 52 new freshman Republicans to join me, and we spoke for 52 straight minutes that morning, one after another, about how we thought it was really unfair for Congress to be missing this opportunity, as we put it, to show the country that we were willing to bite the bullet. Well, of course, the press gallery started getting excited. They had never seen 52 guys get up in a row, all stand up at once and ask to speak one after another. To make a long story short, after all of our press that night or on TV and radio stations all night long, and then Washington Post the following day and so on, 10 days later, for the first time, at least in the history that I can detect, the U.S. Congress voted to reduce its budget by 10%. Now, that's not easy to do. We had a lot of fun doing it. But it's an example of how the system down there is really controlled very, very tightly by a set of rules and by a set of leaders that have been there for a long, long time. And that's why it's going to be difficult for us to bring about the change that we want to bring about until we really start changing the way Congress operates itself. The most important thing that Congress does that I think has to be changed is that it has no capacity to balance its budget. Absolutely none. Congress has had 20 budgets in the last 20 years, and only one of them has been balanced. And of course, last year's budget, the last Carter budget, was supposed to be a balanced budget. It's trumpeted by President Carter. This is going to be the balanced budget, 1981. Well, it came in at $61 billion out of budget. And frankly, Mr. Reagan's going to have the same difficulty because Congress is like the girl in Oklahoma that just couldn't say no. Congress at the beginning of the term is maybe enlightened and recognized that the only way we're really going to fight inflation and the high interest rates is by balancing the budget. But by the time it gets to November or December, and all the interest groups have been marching through our offices, it really doesn't have the courage and the backbone to live within that balanced budget. Of course, the other problem, I think, is that Congress is ignoring the dynamics of our society, especially with regard to our financial institutions. Financial institutions over the last 5 or 10 years have been undergoing the greatest period of change in this country's history. I'm afraid to look at the Wall Street Journal each day to see whether Woolworths has bought INA, or whether you're going to see Exxon merging with Merrill Lynch, or what's going to happen next. Every day, it seems that there's some dramatic new change taking place. And it's funny that the Sears Roebuck, of course, acquisition of Coldwell Banker is a good example. But we're seeing more of this every single day. And the funny thing is, it's happening almost regardless of what the federal government is saying. The real world, the world in which you all operate, the real world of changing financial institutions, of consumers and customers demanding new products, goods, and services, is changing so fast with the new technology, with the new nationalization of our telecommunications and computer networks, that the government is just sitting there wondering what has been happening all this time. The government is regulating our financial institutions with laws that were passed during the 20s and the 30s. The Glass-Steagall Act, the McFadden Act, many of the laws that have separated or drawn lines between our financial institutions for the last 50 years are so out of date. But Congress is doing nothing. And Congress is going to sit there and wait until you folks are selling money market funds and everything else together. You're all going to become a part of a terribly confused and competitive, I think, financial institutions marketplace, where the consumer, of course, has a great deal of choice, a great deal of opportunity to pick and choose, but some of you are going to have advantages and some of you aren't. Those of you that happen to be working for a company that's regulated by the federal government, you're going to be the great victim. But some of you that are going to be somehow unregulated by the federal government, you're going to be working for the Sears Roebucks of the world, or whatever. You're going to get out of the federal regulatory trap and have greater freedoms and opportunities to provide new products and services. Of course, the biggest problem is in the banking area, where there are banks that have very, very onerous legislation, regulatory control, competing with people who are almost unfettered entirely. Take, for example, the situation with money market funds. If you had $10,000 and you want to save it for your son's college education, and you had $10,000 and you wanted to save it for your son's college education, but you walked down to a savings and loan and plopped your money in there, and you walked down to a money market brokerage firm and you plopped your money down there, you would have about 45 million federal regulators making sure that your savings and loan didn't steal from you, or didn't pay too much interest, or didn't open too many branches, or didn't give you too much information or too little. And you would have absolutely no federal regulation except for the SEC, which basically is saying, as long as the fellow who sold you your money market fund tells you mostly the truth, it's all right. And that's an example of how confused and schizophrenic our federal regulatory marketplace is. I love all this competition. I'm sure all you do. You're salesmen like I was, and you relish the opportunity. Of course, I shouldn't say this, but I really think that selling insurance is about the toughest selling in the world. And you're doing it day in and day out. So you should be proud and anxious to see all the competition. But there are a lot of people out there who have been blessed by all this regulation for so many years, and now they haven't responded to a consumer need in so long that they've forgotten what it's like. They've gotten accustomed to the big blanket, security blanket of some federal regulatory agency, and they're unwilling to see the changes that are written on the wall. We're introducing this week a new bill in Congress. It's the administration's Financial Institution Deregulations Bill, which was introduced on Monday in the Senate and will be introduced this coming Monday in the House. You will be reading about it. Stay tuned. It is the most significant and broad, far-reaching piece of financial institution deregulation in a long, long time. You're going to see, of course, banks now moving into a whole new area of business. You may get some new competition in this regard. But I think you'll also see insurance companies moving into a broad new line of product offerings, trying to deal with the merging of financial services taking place in the marketplace. Really, all government will be doing is confirming the changes that you've already seen take place in your offices and in your customers' offices. I'd be very happy to discuss this bill in greater length with you, because it is a very, very far-reaching one. Because the other piece of legislation that's pretty significant this year, at least it was in my business, is the risk retention bill, which was signed by the President about 5 weeks ago. I'm sure all of you have followed that piece of legislation very closely in the past year or so. It, of course, is responding to the difficulties that small businessmen like myself have had in the product liabilities area for a long, long time. It's going to give, I think, greater opportunities for many of you to provide individual pooling opportunities for businesses and associations especially. I think the thing that you will see growing more and more is associations of customers, just like you are an association of yourselves. Associations of different interest groups will be banding together and seeking specific insurance policies to recognize their own risk environment that exists within their association. Many of you may view that as a competitive threat. If I were you, I'd view it as a tremendous new marketing opportunity. Of course, that's the Irish in me. How about if we get to some questions? Speaking of the Irishman in the crowd, there's there's almost always, when I speak, an Irishman who has a question or two. And I'd be happy to respond to some of your concerns. We have a lot of things going on in Washington that are completely unrelated. Everything from AWACS to Social Security. I'd be happy to respond to questions on those regards too. And I'd also just welcome some specific questions with regard to your industry that I might be able to, I don't know the answer off the top of my head. I can get down there tomorrow afternoon and find out the answer for you. Question? Just leaning on your wrist. No, there must be a question. No? Okay, thank you, Dan.
Does the administration plan to continue, I guess, the Department of Insurance? I don't think they've officially appointed a federal administrator, have they yet?
No, but my understanding is they do plan to continue. Yes?
Congressman, some of the changes are being contemplated in the banking area. One of them to enable the savings and loans and give us competitive return of interest on savings accounts.
What you're talking about is the elimination of Regulation Q, which is the rate, which is the regulation which fixes the ceilings on passport savings accounts and so forth, and savings and loans. Regulation Q is already being phased out over the next 5 years. The question is whether that's being phased out fast enough to satisfy the changing marketplace. In August 1st, phase 2 of Regulation Q removal took place, which allowed the savings and loans to issue the 30-month certificates, which they started issuing, which have a market rate of interest. You know, the All Savers Bill has given the S&Ls and all financial institutions the opportunity to issue a more competitive tax-exempt certificate. I'm one of those who think that Reg Q should be phased out sooner rather than later. The savings and loans prefer to see it phased out later rather than sooner. So what will probably happen, we'll just keep on the current schedule, which is to phase it out entirely by 1985. Yes?
What's the latest guess on your part, your political party's part, as far as what's going to happen with 82? Normally the
On the
administration
balance
moves
of Congress? Yeah, well, the question is what's going to happen in the election races in 82. If I could predict that, I'd be a wealthy man, I'm sure. The situation with redistricting changes it normally. The old rule of thumb is during the mid-year election, congressional election, the party that is not in power usually does better. For example, when Nixon was president, the Democrats gained. When Johnson was president, the Republicans gained in the mid-year election, midterm election. But this year's situation is different because we have the redistricting element thrown in. And of course, redistricting shifts a significant number of seats. The 25 seats which have the greatest likelihood of being eliminated, in other words, those seats which have lost the greatest amount of population and therefore should be eliminated, are all Democrat seats. Every single one of the 25 greatest population losing congressional districts. Of course, that doesn't, the redistricting is not done strictly on a fair basis. It's controlled by political parties that control different states. California is all Democrat. Pennsylvania happens to be mostly Republican, and the people that are controlling the redistricting. Indiana is Republican. Texas is Democrat. So each state has a different, but it's felt that the redistricting process is bound to lead to about 15 new Republican seats being created, since the new seats are more than likely going to be in the suburban areas, which are traditionally Republican, and the old seats that are being eliminated are the urban center city areas, which have lost population. So that'll help the Republican Party, but we need 27 new seats to take majority. I think it'll be a horse race if we can get interest rates down. If we can get interest rates down to 12–13% prime rate, which I think is very, very, very feasible, then we have a fighting chance of gaining control of the Congress. If the prime rate next November is 15% or higher, I wouldn't bet on it, to say the least. It'll be a very, very difficult situation just to hold on to a lot of the gains we made last year. Last year we picked up 33 new seats. In other words, a net gain of 33. Of course, 52 of the members are Republican. Other question? Yes?
How is the prime rate going to go down in the area of over 13%? You're talking to any bankers or real estate people, they say fixed rates go on forever, and you'll get a variable mortgage where maybe you'll get it at 15 and might go to 20.
Well, there's a lot of different predictions right now. I was at a conference on Monday in Los Angeles where there, as you may know, I taught economics at the work school, and I have frequently invited to symposiums of other economists. And the range of forecasts for next year's interest rates, they said there is the widest range that has ever been in memory of any economist. They have the lowest forecast for next year's interest rates is 9%, the highest was 35. Now, being out in California, by the way, was, or maybe that had done with the water and the head flies. They all, I don't know if you've ever been out there for a conference. I was amazed when I went out there for this conference. I get to the airport, and I go down to get my rented car, and I ordered a Chevrolet, and they say, I'm sorry, Mr. Coyne, we don't have any more Chevrolets. We're going to have to give you 280Z. I say, okay, well, if that's what I've got to do, that's what I've got to do. So I drive my 280Z down this 19-lane freeway, and I get to the Holiday Inn, and I walk in, and I checked in, and I said, I'd ask for a nice double bed. And I said, I'm sorry, we don't have any regular double beds. We only have a water bed left. Only in California, the going line in California was that California politics is like a bowl of granola. After you do away, even after you do away with all of the fruits and the nuts, it's still nothing but a bunch of flakes. But to get back to your question, the question with regard to interest rates, I think, is a function of supply and demand, like almost every other product. The interest rates are high today, basically reflecting the high price for credit because of a inflated demand for credit, which of course is inflated by government policies, coupled with a depressed supply of credit, which is of course not only a function of government policies, but the government in the credit markets itself. Government has crowded out other participants in credit markets. 20 years ago, the federal government's credit demands represented less than 5% of the total U.S. credit market. Today, the federal government represents over 25% of the total U.S. credit market, and it is growing. It is continuing to grow, and it's not only the so-called budgetary items, the balanced budget deficits, but there's a lot of off-budget credit pressures that are brought on by the federal government. So the optimism for seeing interest rates come down stems, in my view, and many of those that agree with me, from the increased supply of credit as the high real interest rate, in other words, the difference between the nominal interest rate and the nominal inflation rate, that difference is higher now than it has ever been. The real interest rate today is in excess of 5%. And it very, very rarely has been even above 3%. So we have people reaching the conclusion now that a conclusion that they have not reached for many, many years. And that is that they're going to put some money into savings accounts. They're going to buy CDs, put it into money market funds, take advantage of these 15, 16, 18% rates. So you're seeing a very significant increase in the amount of money that is being diverted from consumption into savings. Therefore, that's all you can do with your money, either spend it or save it. We have gone steadily downhill for 30 years, reducing the percentage that we save, increasing the percentage we spend. We've gone from 86% consumed, 14% saved, down to only 4% saved, and now it is coming back up. As that comes back up the curve, as more money is saved, inevitably interest rates will fall. Now, of course, the government has got to get out of the credit markets as well. We've got to move toward a balanced budget. The sooner we do that, of course, we'll also reduce some of the credit demand. The other thing that I think you're going to see happen in Congress, this is something that I think is a good idea, is the development of constant dollar debt instruments on behalf of the federal government. In other words, the federal government last week floated 20-year notes, treasury notes, 20 years paying almost 16%. Now, if the federal government is borrowing money for 20 years at 16%, how can they really believe that interest rates are going to come down? How can they believe that inflation is going to? If they're borrowing at 16%. So I think what the federal government should do is issue constant dollar notes at a very low interest rate, at 2 or 3%, where the principal repaid at 20 years is adjusted through a inflation factor to account so that the $10,000 you give to the federal government is you're going to get back with a dollar amount that is equal in purchasing value. In In other words, if you go to the federal government and say, here's $10,000 to buy a treasury bill, and I can either give that to you or go out and buy a Chevrolet Caprice, I want you to give me back enough money 20 years from now so that I can buy another Chevrolet Caprice. In the meantime, I'm willing to accept 2% interest. And if the government were to do that, I think you'd see tremendous new return to long-term savings. The savings picture today is not just a question of interest rates, it's also a question of long versus short term. Nobody saves or invests long term anymore. There is no long term. The bond market is flat. It has just evaporated because everybody realizes they have no assurance that their damn dollar that they get in 20 years is going to be able to buy anything. We have got to restore confidence that our dollar 20 years from now is going to be at least purchasing power, or at least the debt instruments that we create are going to provide the security. And if we gave people the confidence of thinking, I think you'd see fiduciary organizations like pension funds flocking to buy constant dollar debt instruments were we to authorize them. And I think the Congress will authorize them, first in the federal budget, but then also in financial institutions. And that would have a very significant impact in the insurance industry as well, of course, because it would provide pension funds with a vehicle for assuring the protection of capital, which is their big dilemma right now as they see their capital portfolio shrinking and shrinking. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you think going back to the gold standard has any merit or will become a reality?
Well, I think what I was just talking about, a type of debt constant dollar debt interest, is a better alternative because the gold standard is trying to achieve the same thing. You're trying to give to the dollar a value that people can rely upon. The gold standard is not a situation of trying to say how much gold is going to be worth. It's really trying to say how much the dollar is going to be worth. Now, I would prefer to value the dollar or to value financial instruments in a market basket of consumer goods rather than gold, because the value of gold is a very limited supply, which is controlled by only 4 or 5 countries, essentially its production. And I don't think going to a good for standardizing the dollar that is largely produced by the Soviet Union and South Africa is as logical as valuing the dollar in something that we produce, which is why I think a constant dollar security, which would be basically reflecting the cost of all the products that we produce in this country, would be a far more logical and meaningful standard to the consumer. But the gold standard is gaining momentum in Congress because of a very important group of congressmen and senators that are supporting it. But it's still a long, long way from having anything close to a majority. And frankly, I don't think it'll ever have a majority unless we have hyperinflation like they have in some of the other countries of the world, 35–40% inflation rates, where people just look for any panacea they can find to hook their future on. Yes?
How would the goods that constant dollar
Dead?
what goods would determine that? Because let's say you pick that Chevrolet Caprice at $10,000 to buy that. In 10 years, that might be only worth $50.
That's true.
But
Well, it's already done now. There's something called the deflator, which is calculated by the U.S. Treasury, which is done, it's basically determined by a panel of individuals who put together a composite consumer purchasing, which is part car, part diamond, part butter, part MX missile, all the things that we buy, and it sort of put them all together in a market basket, and of course it reflects new goods that are created too. The deflator 20 years ago probably had a slide rule included in it, and this year it has a calculator. And so of course a lot of things go down in price, some things go up in price, and hopefully the deflator reflects this. The deflator is not the same as the consumer price index. It's a slightly different measure. The consumer price index is modeled more on the average American's buying, they look at what the average American buys. The deflator is more of a function of what America produces. It's a slightly different figure, usually a little bit lower, but not much, and it closely follows. I hope that answers that. Any other questions? Well, thank you very, very much for giving me the opportunity to meet with you. And if any of you are out in Bucks County or Washington, stop by and see me. I'll show you the videotapes that Leonard left in the office.
Thank you very much, Congressman. I guess I believed everything you said.
said, except that you were delighted to see your brother-in-law.